Okay, great. Well, thank you for your patience, and welcome to Moving Past Empathy, calling museum audiences to action. So a couple things to note before we get started. We are going to be using Slido. So it's the same scoop and ordeal if you were at the keynote or at a couple other presentations that used it. So go to slido.com and use the hashtag MCN 2017, and you can log all your questions there as we go along, so that once we're done, can have them all there, upvote them, get the ones you care most about to the top, so we can make sure we cover everything you guys are looking to explore and discuss. So welcome again. Really appreciate you coming here. This layout first, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the topic, and then our beautiful panelists here are going to give some examples on how easy or hard it might be to actually call audiences to action using interpretive technologies in gallery spaces. So I want to start by positing this question. Is empathy enough? So is it enough? You know, we all do what we do to tell a story, to provide insight and guide attachment to our collections and missions with our communities. But what do we do with that empathy when often we elicit it, we create it with moving and powerful stories, but then it's left in the museum space? You know, audiences don't take that empathy with them and actually act on what they've learned through your collections. So how can we help? To borrow a phrase from a beautiful presenter last year, how can we seal or close that contract of listening and call audiences to act on what they've learned? So I work for Antenna International and have a profound pleasure of speaking with professionals like you on a daily basis. And the conversations I have is all about integrating digital storytelling with a larger community purpose. So some of the big things I hear from folks like you are, you know, our mission is to educate, or it's to inspire, open the audience's eyes, you know, expose your visitors to something new or challenging or different than what they may see outside of your space. We also hear that, you know, you feel your institutions are to create a safe space for this open dialogue and use digital technologies and interpretive technologies to not just tell facts, but actually engage with a meaningful story. So how does this measure up to what audiences actually want? Because again, we're all about audiences. It doesn't really mean much what the museum wants. It's all about the visitor. So the data shows that museums are actually the most trusted educational source in the US. And more people than ever, about 54%, trust scientific-related news coming from museums than any other resource, be it, you know, NGOs, governmental agencies, the news. They trust us. They trust museums. On that same note, more people expect history museums to tell authentic and holistic stories that aren't whitewashed anymore, that tell the true story of all groups of people. And we see this through social media. These conversations have been going on for a really long time, but with the huge, profound impacts that social media has, we can actually see this as a two-way conversation and understand that visitors do want holistic stories and to engage in that way. A lot of you may know Colleen Dillon Schneider's blog. It's like a Bible, I'm sure, to a lot of you. It is for me. But these next data points are absolutely incredible because this impact study asked visitors and audiences how they felt, you know, on a rating scale about different institutions as highly credible information. So for art museums and history museums and natural history museums, science centers, aquariums, and zoos, all of these types of institutions score a mean higher than 77%. So that means that people had almost 100% compliance saying, yes, this is highly credible information that we're hearing here. Not only is it highly credible, but 74% say it is trustworthy. And this is the really big one. So 73% actually desire these institutions to recommend certain behavior or actions to their audiences. I think that's pretty huge if you just want to think about that for a moment. Audiences are asking us what we can do with the stories that we tell in our institutions. So, with that being said, it's pretty clear that in a lot of ways museums and audiences are both looking for the same thing in digital storytelling. Both have the same goals. So this is great. This is really good news for us. So where does technology come in, and how can technology play a role in this goal? Technology is great in creating a third space. You know, someone can put on a headset or put on headphones and be in a separate space for a moment to be able to think, listen, and reflect on what's, difficult topics or whatever your collection is dealing with. Of course, digital storytelling elicits empathy, especially with human-centric storytelling, leveraging oral histories, your digital archives, all of that highly, highly personal and influential first-person narratives are a great way to move people past the point of empathy and ask them what they can do after their visit. So even further, how can we continue to encourage visitors to channel that empathy past the museum experience? Of course, you can ask them questions, ask them, posit recommendations. But going past that, we are going to hand this over now to our beautiful panelists who are going to speak a bit further on this subject, starting with Frazier, and then Meghan Smith and Dana Liss. We're going to start with, here are some great ways. This is really awesome and encouraging ways to move people to action. And then we're going to come back to that initial question, is empathy enough? Is all of this necessary, or can we just elicit empathy and call it a day? So with that, I'll hand it off to Kai.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Frazier, and I am just recently leaving the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., where I served as its senior digital marketing strategist. So I had the pleasure of working with a lot of the content one-on-one, interviewing those stories, and trying to figure out how we can get those stories out to the public. Now I do consulting where I focus on making museums and cultural institutions inclusive of people of color, both digitally and actually getting to the museums. So I'm going to go through a few examples that I have, and I just want to bear with me because I have to toggle back and forth between my videos that I have. My videos are about 2 minutes each, so this is pretty much heavy video for me, so I won't bore you too much. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. When I worked in the museum space, it's always hard for people to want to get people to take action. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is a government entity, so we can't advocate for anything. So that poses a unique problem. So luckily for us, there are so many other institutions, companies who are actually prototyping things that they have built on their own, and they're looking for somebody to host it. And the reason why we are able to host it is because it directly correlates with our mission. So if you will, I'm going to just quickly read our mission so all of this that I'm going to talk to you about makes sense. So at the museum is a living memorial to the Holocaust, and the museum inspires citizens and leaders worldwide to confront hatred, prevent genocide, and promote human dignity. The museum teaches millions of people each year about the dangers of unchecked hatred and the need to prevent genocide. And we encourage them to act, cultivating a sense of moral responsibility among our citizens so that they will respond to the monumental challenges that confront our world. So in our mission, we actually do want people to act, but it's tricky because we cannot advocate for such action. So I'm going to take you through these 3 examples. People don't know that for the Holocaust Museum, we don't just do the Holocaust. We talk with ISIS survivors, Syrian survivors, Rwandan survivors, Burma, Myanmar survivors who are right now in the conflict, Cambodian survivors. So we have a wide range of people that we are tasked with telling their stories. So I'm going to go ahead and first get into the example from the USC Shoah Foundation, which is Steven Spielberg's foundation that he has put into basically how can we actually tell these stories of Holocaust survivors when they pass, because the generation right now, of course, is dying off. So the goal for this experience was to stay true to the museum's mission. I can't keep stressing that. To create empathy, to inform audiences of what's happening, and then we wanted to personalize visitor experience. So I'm going to do my best now oh boy, let me see, nope, pressed the wrong button already. No, I can click this one? Yeah. Yep, and then I drag it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm going to try to do this, okay, and I'll try to go here. Okay, so he's just gonna give you a quick overview about what this project looks like. This is hard for people to understand it without seeing it. So let me, did my video just changed? I'm so sorry. All the tech problems. So escape, of course. Give me 1 second. Nope. My screen's cut off. Let's see, there we go. So if I go back, nope, there we go. Okay, so now we have to watch the ad, of course. Give me 1 second. I tell people I'm a magnet, so anytime I'm next to a computer, everything will go wrong. So I'm pretty used to this, so bear with me.
You guys, it's true.
It's true. It's true.
I was prepared to figure this out
Yes.
today, and we were fine.
Okay, so when all else fails, we'll reload. There we go. Okay, so I can skip. Okay, so give me 1 second.
Fortress of Solitude, Superman can speak to his father, even though his father has long since passed away. Well, essentially what's happening there, Superman is having a nice fluid conversation with a recording of his father. Well, that very technology has arrived. What do you hope people learn most from your experiences?
What I would like my legacy, my story, the legacy of my story to be.
It's called New Dimensions in Testimony, and it was developed by the University of Southern California's Shoah Foundation. That's the institute started by Steven Spielberg to help combat hate and violence, primarily by capturing stories of Holocaust survivors and helping to tell those stories in unique and compelling ways. Well, this certainly qualifies. It may just look like a big TV spun sideways, on it a Holocaust survivor telling his story, but what's happening here, you can sit down in front of him and just ask questions into this microphone, and he'll answer as if he was sitting there in the flesh. Questions can be as basic as when were you born to deeper ones like what was the most horrific thing you experienced? Or do you ever feel like you want to get revenge?
I'm not a revengeful person. So I wanted justice. And justice is not revenge.
Holocaust survivors have been speaking in classrooms for a couple of generations now and telling their story and engaging with young people. And we realize that that opportunity is soon to be lost. And we wanted to try and capture that intimate moment by which when young people have heard the story of a Holocaust survivor, they can ask their own questions about their lives and the causes and consequences of their experiences.
Now, if you're among those who likes the gritty, techie details on what's happening behind the scenes, how it's actually working, strap in.
So what happens is you're speaking into a microphone, an automatic speech recognition software picks up your words, turns that into text. That text is fed into a natural language processor which looks at the string of words and finds out what it is that you're talking about, and then goes and searches in the database of video clips which have been turned into text themselves, and brings back the most appropriate video clip to answer the question that you're asking.
Each survivor was interviewed for 5 days and asked about 1,000 questions, recorded by a sphere of cameras that captured every single angle, sound, and emotion. Back to the Superman part. If you're wondering whether maybe you'll be able to someday speak to loved ones who have passed on in this way, the Shoah Foundation says, yeah, an offshoot of the institute called Storyfile was created pretty much to do exactly that.
So I'm going to pause it there so you can probably pretty much at this
My
point
name is
see,
Pinchas Guter.
I'll let this play. This
I
is what
will
they want it to
answer
look like
any
in classrooms now.
questions you might
So,
have for
sorry, of
me.
course, there it goes again. Okay, so the good thing is you can actually take this now into classrooms and use it without any technology needed. They're setting it up for you and it's free, and it's a great thing for people to have. One of the great things we got to do at the museum is we actually had that survivor, Pincus, come and watch visitors engage with virtual Pincus while real Pincus was actually sitting behind them and they had no idea. So that was really nice to watch. For this one? Sorry. Yes, perfect. Okay. So going to the next example that I have, this one is probably my favorite. This is a company we worked with called Shared Studios. Shared Studios had a portal that they put. So the portal is the equivalent of like a shipping container you would see in the back of a truck. But once you actually walked into the portal, you were able to have face-to-face, real-time conversations with refugees who had fled basically Syrian mass atrocities, ISIS, and you could talk to them face-to-face. The problem with this for most visitors is they were terrified. They didn't know what they were going to experience once they walked past this portal. So this is my favorite example because we teach at the Holocaust Museum that no human being is illegal. It just depends on where you were born and what time period you were born in. So this example is Johanna is the one in the red. She's a Holocaust survivor that was living in Germany, and she actually fled to Albania, and she stayed with a Muslim family that where she found refuge, and then eventually was able to return to Germany. The refugee we have is Omar. Omar is a Syrian refugee who found refuge in a camp in Berlin. So where he found refuge in Berlin, she fled Berlin a long time ago. So the great thing about this is that this helped people to erase fear of what a refugee was. Omar cracked me up because he would have like a Jordan Jumpman hat on and like his iPod to the side. He was like texting, like making YouTube videos while we were doing it. I'm like, Omar, come on, come back with us. But he was actually making an app to help other refugees so they could understand the process once they actually got to Germany because they didn't speak German. And it was great, once again, because every visitor experience was personalized. And then we educated people on the crisis and what's happening. So if I have my Twitter information up here, but I've tried to retweet all of these interactions with this on my timeline. So if you are interested to see more of this, you can see we had students come in and do rap battles with some of the refugees, which is really nice to see. We have students in Iraq that would come in, so we would talk to a bunch of students and they would ask us questions like, what is snow like? Have you been to Disneyland? But they were just bored at the camps and just wanted somebody to talk to. So where we were afraid to what we would see, these were just regular kids that wanted to, live, essentially. So I'm gonna, oh boy, here we go. Where's my cursor? Okay, there it is. Okay.
Are we on?
I'm ready. Matt, are you ready? I'm rolling. All right, whenever you guys would like to talk.
Certainly. My name is Johanna Newman.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. Do you have family with you in Berlin?
No, I'm alone here.
You're all alone there?
Yes,
And your family is still where?
I'm here in Germany, and the rest of my family is still in Damascus.
I do realize how lost these refugees can be. And perhaps if they talk to somebody who has had more or less the same or similar experience, that would give them some encouragement that there is a future, even if the present is very troubling and very dangerous.
You can feel my feeling from your heart because you had this experience,
No, I think that many of us and people who went through the concentration camps
Yeah.
for a very long time couldn't talk about it because they knew that others simply could not understand what they went through. And so what you're saying is absolutely correct.
So we got to talk, oh no, before it goes to the next one, hold on, nope, don't want that, nope. Back here. Okay, so with this, Omar went on to tell us, because we had this project in our museum for about 3 months, so we talked to Omar every single day, and he told us that the most impactful experience he had actually was this experience with Johanna. About calling people to action, well, we didn't have to ask people to take an action, Omar did. So at the end of every conversation, the visitors would say, Omar, what do you want me to do? And he would say to kids, hug your mother, because I can't hug my mother tonight. Or he would tell them, tell your friend that we're human. So basically he was the one asking people to take an action. And it's not just Omar they talked to we had people who would come and play their cultural music for our visitors. So they could come in and just have an experience and not know what they were gonna see, but it was always the opposite of what they were expecting. And why this is so important is because, let me go to current slide. Yeah, why this is so important and why there's an urge to get these projects done with the museum is because Johanna died the next month. So this is the last thing she actually did before she was, I want to say 92. and she passed away. So now we are able to tell her story in so many different ways that we probably couldn't beforehand. And we're so glad that we were able to make this video, and it's used in classrooms now and, you know, all across because she was willing enough to do this. And Shared Studios put this project on. Shared Studios now wants to take this portal and put it on the back of a truck and drive it across the U.S. so people in small towns can understand what it is to talk to a refugee. And then the last one I'm going to do, which is, this one's a little tougher, but we also work with, like I said, a lot with Syria, and this was the case for Caesar. Caesar was a military photographer for Assad in Syria, but his job went from taking photos of regular things he knew, and then out of nowhere, he was taking photos of dead bodies, people he recognized, and he knew something was not right. So what he did is he took the memory card out of his camera, he put it in his shoe, and he defected from Syria. He came to the museum, and we helped him get those photos out, and they were used to show the crimes against humanity that Assad was doing in Syria. This is the gassing that people couldn't get hard proof of. Now we have it because of this man who, when he comes, he's always wrapped in this poncho. We can't see his face. We have to call him Caesar. And if you can't tell already, we took him to Congress. So we were able to stay true to our mission still, but we were actually able to stimulate policy change to save more civilians and then give voices to the victims who died because of these crimes. So I'm going to play a part of his video. It's a little bit longer, just so in Holocaust Museum graphic content, viewer discretion advised, is my full disclosure. So let me try to, oh boy, yep, there we go. Just work with that at this point. And nope. Oh, there we go. So it's just talking about he had a normal job, and then out of nowhere, this became his job. And he said, this is not right. So it took him so much so to actually smuggle these photos out. We took these photos to the United Nations in New York. We put them on big easels, and we actually put them so everybody could come down and watch them. Then we took them to the Capitol. So we took those photos, took them to the Capitol, and from here we got earned media stories. So now other news orgs are taking the story out, and now we're even seeing Facebook pages that were created where they're matching the faces of these victims to people they know, and they're identifying the bodies because nobody knew who these people were. It was all done in secret, and these are Assad's secret prisons. So by doing this, we cannot advocate, but we took the evidence to Congress, and then it was up to the Congress people to actually advocate for change. And this is not the first time our museum has done this. We also did this for Iraq. We had, we brought proof. We sent people to Iraq. The museum actually sends people to these areas. We sent them to Iraq, and they got testimony from people fleeing ISIS. And we worked with the Yazidi community, and we saw that they were deliberately being killed off by ISIS. Therefore, by pure definition, that's a genocide if you are looking to exterminate one group of people. So we took those findings to the Department of State, and then the Department of State later, a couple months, declared that this was a genocide happening in Iraq with the Yazidi. So this is, like you're saying, we took this so the world would know, and this is us when they took them to the UN. So for the first time, people weren't seeing these images. So it was very important to get the word out to stimulate policies so people could take an action. So we're not advocating, but we're giving them all the information that they can to make an informed decision about what's happening. So with that, I'm gonna try, whoops, yep, and this is him once again. And I was just going through the feed, and I saw that they awarded Caesar with the Nuremberg Peace Prize for doing this. He just got awarded recently for being this brave to bring this work. So these scenes you're seeing in the background is when he actually comes to Congress, and he'll come to the museum every now and then, but he's pretty much in hiding from this point out. So now I'm done with the video, so I will go out. So here's what I learned, or the major keys I'll say from all these experiences. People can create compassion when they have spaces to actually process the experience. We were putting people in these situations and then saying, you know, because I interview, I would say, okay, what you learned, what happened? I had a couple of students who went to talk to Omar in that portal, and he told them to hug their mothers, and I went to the student and said, okay, what did you learn? And she just started to cry and I was like, wait, no, it's okay, it's okay. But I didn't give her time to process it. I had another boy who was with me who I asked him, what did you learn? And he was stone cold because he didn't know what he experienced. So without giving them that space, so in the museum we have a white room where you can go, it's a huge room where you can just go and reflect. I also work with the African American Museum, so in that space there's a contemplative court where you can go after you go through the history galleries to pause and reflect. And about that reflection, pretty much things get stopped. And then two, this only works if you can sometimes put a call to action when we're putting this information out on social media, which is what I usually do. So maybe discuss your experience with a hashtag. I see a lot of things like this, there's not even a hashtag attached to it, so they can't share their information. Share the social media video is one thing we usually ask them to do. Attend an event. We have a lot of the people who, Caesar can't come and talk to the museum, but we have other people who escaped the Assad's regime, and they come and do programs at the museum. So we want you to come and actually learn more about what's happening. Become a member and donate, because although the museum is federal, these projects are funded by donations. So we want you to come and consider donating, and then visit the website to learn more. And then also, I just want to be very transparent that a lot of museums move very slow. So keep an eye out for other companies that may align with your mission, so you can get projects like these out in your field. So my company that I have right now is curated by Kai, so I have all my information here because people always ask me questions like, how did you do this? What happened? Because they don't understand how a museum could actually take things to Congress. So if you have any questions, here's my email, my Twitter handle. It's curated by Kai on everything, Instagrams, Twitter, whatever you have, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So I would love to fill any questions you have if we run out of time. So thank you so much. That's all my information. I'm gonna pass it to Meghan.
Is this gonna let me see my notes? Okay. Hey everybody, my name is Meghan Smith. I'm an exhibit developer and educator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. And I'm gonna, spoiler alert, start with the end of my presentation, which is sort of like the verbal shrug emoji, which is that moving past empathy is really hard. So I'm sorry I'm not gonna assault you with some, this is how we did it perfectly and how it's all working perfectly, but just talk a little bit about what we've struggled with at the museum in the past couple of years as we've dealt with some stuff that's been really relevant. So to back up a little bit, the National Museum of American History is dedicated to helping people understand the past in order to make sense of the present and shape a more humane future. And that was a new part of our strategic plan that we added about 5 years ago, and it was pretty controversial at the time. I think it's not a huge, I think it's not overly generalizing to say that historians are more concerned about the past than the future, but actually they also just feel like it's maybe not our place to talk to people about the future. But there were then other people in the museum who were really excited about this new focus on relevance. So in June of this year, we opened The Nation We Build Together, which is a 30,000 square foot renovation of the second floor of our West Wing. It includes 2 permanent flagship galleries, a changing exhibition gallery, and then a public programs and special events space. One of the exhibitions is American Democracy, A Great Leap of Faith, which looks at the imperfect and unfinished process of becoming a nation by, for, and of the people. It posits that each generation confronts the same questions the founding generation did. Who gets to participate and who decides? How do you get people to participate? What are the ways you can participate beyond the ballot? And what kind of citizenry do you need to create a healthy and effective democracy? On the other side of the floor, we have Many Voices, One Nation, which asks visitors to consider how we live up to the national motto, E pluribus unum, or out of many, one. And how 3 questions, who is free, who is equal, and who is included, have defined our negotiations with one another in the workplace, in places of worship, in sports, in education, in the military. The Nation We Build Together also includes a temporary gallery that opened with a 1,000 square foot exhibition on religion in early America, and Unity Square, which is a public programs and event space that features the Greensboro lunch counter. This floor is a huge chunk of our physical real estate. It's about 1/6 of the museum, but it's also spiritually just a huge chunk of who we are. Most people who come to the American History Museum are either coming in pursuit of some of our most famous pop culture objects, or they're coming here on what we kind of think of as a patriotic pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. So they want to find themselves in a big, sweeping story of American history. And increasingly these days, they want us to help them figure out what is going on. And we all say, I wish I knew. So, you guys, we had no idea how relevant we were going to be, but we started planning this in 2010. And this is off the record, don't tweet this, but like 2016 was kind of like us sitting around going, oh shit. So these topics are obviously evergreen, but they were taking more of a prominent place in people's minds. And so when we were putting together these experiences and these exhibitions, we were really talking a lot about what actions were we going to push visitors towards taking certain actions. And I think, we're all very we're all do-gooders in this field. We want to make everything better. And so we were really inclined to say, yeah, we want people to go out and make this country a better place and take action. But we were encountering a lot of challenges. So one of those big challenges, and I see you're wearing the t-shirt, thank you for, one of our challenges is to be nonpartisan. And Kai talked about this a little bit at the Holocaust Museum as well. I wholeheartedly agree. Museums are not neutral. And hat tip to Mike Morawski and Latanya Autry for these awesome t-shirts and for preaching this gospel. Our values and our biases are reflected in everything from the architecture of our buildings to our collecting plans. But as a federal institution and myself as a federal employee, there are a lot of actual laws and restrictions on what we can say and what we can advocate for. And that's a real challenge when you're talking about these things. Now, you can encourage action while being nonpartisan, but that comes with its own challenges, which I'll talk about in a few slides. So another one of our challenges, you may have noticed there are a lot of people in the country who don't want the federal government telling them what to do. And you may not think, when you think, oppressive federal government, I hope that you don't think about the Smithsonian first. But our visitors we are a federal institution, and that does shape the way that people think about the messaging that we are giving to them. We get everything from red hats to pink hats in our building, and they're all coming to find themselves to understand better the past, but a lot of them really don't want us to tell them what to do in the future. And then there's this little problem of remaining relevant. Our major exhibits are up for 20 years. And to be relevant even a month from now is a challenge, but when you're putting millions of dollars into exhibits that will have some changing elements, but will not ultimately change, we have to kind of take a higher up view. So hey guys, use your blog to be relevant. It's not brain surgery, but we do try now, at least having those physical exhibits that we can connect to gives us a base from which we can do things like write on about more relevant things on our blog very carefully. So we began to see our role as one of encouraging three main things: reflection, conversation, and participation. And those seem like pretty soft actions, but they're all really essential parts of creating that humane future that we're interested in. So in Unity Square example, we worked with the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Nina's here, our amazing partners at the Exploratorium, to develop American Experiments, which is a set of 5 activities that are designed to encourage visitors to reflect, to talk to each other, and to participate. This activity introduces people to the naturalization oath, and then gets them to reflect on what they think good citizens should do and what the actions of a good citizens are, and then to share it to the hashtag #MyFellowCitizens. This is an activity called People Power, where visitors have to create a human chain to connect 2 poles in order to activate a song. And when we were first coming up with these ideas, this is the one that I was like, ooh, it might be cheesy. But it's actually really moving to watch strangers holding hands with each other. They look out, they can see the mall, they can see the Washington Monument, they can see the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and then Pete Seeger's This Land Is Your Land place. We're asking them to do something that is both very simple, hold hands with someone, and actually very profound. I didn't, and I don't think we think about physical touch. It's kind of a hard thing to figure out how you bring that into exhibits and experiences. But I didn't think that strangers would do this, but they do it all the time. It takes very little prompting to get them to hold each other's hands, which was really kind of a shock to me. But they're looking, it really snaps them out of their museum fatigue. It gets them thinking in a different way about themselves as part of this process. So throughout the floor, we've tried to remind visitors that this isn't a disconnected story of the past, but it's their story, by making sure that they can see themselves in our media elements like this film on celebrations. Our audio guide doesn't present visitors with like the institutional voice. We've tried to include as many different kinds of voices as possible. People who are descendants of the people who originally owned the objects, families who we've featured in the exhibition, and then even some famous people like Colin Powell. So we want people to see that this is everyone's story. We've also encouraged reflection, conversation, and participation outside of the building through programs like What It Means to Be American, which is a partnership with Los Angeles-based nonprofit Zocalo Public Square. We've done about 15 events through them, and we publish 2 times a week original humanities journalism. We're attempting to bring sort of a new, more diverse generation into this big conversation about big national questions. Questions like, are Americans still risk takers? What can Hawaii teach America about race? Do we still know how to be good citizens? And just to plug this, if you want to learn more, you can go to whatitmeanstobeamerican.org. So I guess you could describe our approach as one of leading a horse to water and hoping they'll drink. If someone is concerned with police brutality in the United States, we can't say, you should really go join your local Black Lives Matter chapter. But what we can do is offer them a wall of protest posters from all kinds of protests in the past and show them how people in the past have voiced their opinions and made change. Because what we really want is for history to inspire young people to become active citizens. We want them to come together. We want them to exercise their First Amendment rights. We want them to protest what they see as wrong with the world. We want them to work together to make change. And that all sounds really inspiring, right? The only problem is that that's what these people think they're doing also. Nowhere in this picture is a more humane future. Action in itself is not a good. Which is why I come back to this. This is really hard. It requires institutional fortitude. It requires you to be really careful about your tone. It requires a deep understanding of your role in the community. It also, you just need to accept that success is elusive and very difficult to measure, which is something I think is a problem for us in museums in general, because I think that what we do the best is always really hard to measure. So like democracy, our floor and our work is unfinished and it's imperfect, but that doesn't mean that we're not gonna stop, or that doesn't mean that we are gonna stop trying. So, thank you.
Hello. I was wondering how many people here are from art museums? Just a few. So my name's Dana Liss. I'm also from an art museum. I'm from the Studio Museum in Harlem. And this presentation was a really interesting exercise for me, coming from a mission-specific museum, a culturally specific museum, to think about this idea of calling to action and trying to encourage visitors to feel a certain way. So I wanted to keep this brief so that we can speak at the end, but I wanted to give some more context about my museum and then sort of our thinking around this issue and open it up to everyone for potential suggestions. So the Studio Museum in Harlem is in the heart of Harlem on 125th Street. It's a modern and contemporary art museum devoted to artists of African descent. And it was founded in 1968 by a diverse group of artists, activists, and philanthropists to answer the urgent need to see works of artists of African descent take their place in museums, galleries, exhibitions, and collections. And so to sum up sort of what we're about, the idea is that, the artist has a function to play and a role to play in communities, and that part of what art can do is to bring us together to, and that what museums can do is be a space to bring everyone together and to humanize us. So I wanted to give an example of a lot of the programming that we do that is not overtly political or social, and I think that when people first think about these culturally specific museums, there's this easy tendency to pigeonhole what we're doing, but we present art and artists the same way other art museums present art and artists. So this was a big exhibition in 2016 featuring the abstractionist Alma Thomas. We were the first museum to present her work sort of spanning the decades of her career, and she's now enjoying newfound sort of place in the art historical canon. So our approach to education is this inquiry-based model of engagement. So we aren't, telling visitors one specific narrative. We're asking them to come together and generate meaning together. And I manage our website, so this is specifically from our education department. So I learned a lot about this topic through them. But through this process, like I said, we're not trying to make them feel a certain way, but this sort of meaning generation together can result in empathy. So while it's not our mandate to give visitors, explicit directives, we sort of like those soft asks that you guys mentioned. We always educate, we ask people to talk together and online through social, and we invite people to come back and engage with us further. So it's not doing nothing, but it's, I guess the soft call. But this has become a little bit tougher when we do present programming that deals with more overtly social and political topics. Last fall, we presented this exhibition on protest and artistic gestures of protest. And the works on your right are photographs by the photographer Devin Allen, who documented the Baltimore uprising. And that small drawing in the corner is by Rudy Shepard, and that is a drawing of Michael Brown. So there were very, pointed works that we don't really expect artists to respond to current events, but when they do, especially in this political moment, we felt that it was an appropriate exhibition to present with this really focused look. And these are some more works in the show. These are prints by Kerry James Marshall, and he's often dealing with imagery and language from the civil rights era, and he reproduced these protest signs. So around that show, that protest-themed show, The Window and the Breaking of the Window, it prompted the museum staff to revisit, I know this is a crappy picture, but to revisit this idea of a space for reflection and allowing visitors to process what they've just seen and experienced. And so we revised the text in this reading and reflection space. And what it says is, share your thoughts, comments, or drawings in response to exhibitions using one of the cards provided. Feel free to use the prompts below to guide your reflections. So the prompts were, what struck, confused, challenged, excited you as you moved around the museum? What issues are most important to you today? And how does art empower you? And then we have our little caveat. Please note that your comments may be shared on site, in print, or online. So we've sort of, this is a no-tech solution because you can see the pencils and the little cards, and we've really struggled with how to turn this space and use this space to its full potential, to not just have visitors respond to us, but to engage with each other. And we haven't really found the right way to host this dialogue online. And that's what I sort of wanted to leave with today, for art museums and institutions that don't have such, universal missions. How do you responsibly moderate these discussions that, are sort of outside of your mission? How do you not take on that role of the expert and try and gear it back to art and artists and what you're about? So just thought we could open it up to you guys.
So I just checked Slido, and we have a overwhelming 0 comments so far, which means that you're welcome to talk to us in person.
Yeah, we'll go that route.
I thought you guys would be excited. This is our conference, fun stuff. But any questions, comments, points of discussion?
So since measurement is always important, but these kinds of things are really tricky to measure, how do we track if people are engaging in some kind of action afterwards? I mean, obviously counting hashtag mentions, et cetera, but what have you tried? What are you thinking of trying? All that good stuff.
Well, I can say that, so we're doing kind of, again, soft measuring in a couple of different ways, because we do have a hashtag attached to that one. How many people actually are uploading pictures is sort of a nice thing. I should have said that in Unity Square, it's a facilitated space, so we have people in there who can also track. They've been doing tracking studies of where people are going, and I think that kind of sense of having people that are actually able to see visitor behavior regularly is really helpful. We have money in the grant that we got, me and I are going to be talking about this soon, that we're going to be doing a formal outside evaluation. But I think that getting at that I think it's really hard. It's something that our museum is talking about constantly. How do we measure impact? And I think about, I had this transformative museum experience when I think I must have been like 7 or 8 maybe, and I was at the San Diego Museum of Man, and there was a woman making tortillas, and she put a little butter on it, and I ate that, and I can still remember how that tastes, and I still have super positive associations with that museum, and I think that was one of the first things that got me to really love museums. How the hell do you measure that, right? That is what I'm talking about. There's this big, we can talk about numbers, and we can even get at initial impact, I think, but there is this bigger field-wide importance of what we do that I think is very difficult. So again, shrug emoji.
I'll say too, for the Holocaust Museum, we also do a lot of measuring in our earned media. So our stories being picked up by the Washington Post, the New York Times. When the government, Department of State, for example, does release a report, are they quoting us in our research? And we're seeing a lot of that. So it's always a win for us when we are seeing our findings that we've sent people to those areas and seeing how it's affecting change, policy, thoughts, opinions, and things like that. That's it. I struggle with that question because I will say that I just went to LACMA to do the what's the director of Birdman, Alejandro. Yeah, so I came from, and his VR experience. Have any of you guys seen it or went to it? It's like it's simulating a immigrant crossing the border from Mexico to the U.S. and they put you in a when you first go in there, they make you take first of all, you're by yourself. So you go in one at a time. You go into a metal container, they call it the Frazier, which they detain immigrants with. So you have to take your shoes off once you go in this. So you're by yourself in this very cold, like freezer-like container, and there's a huge red buzzer that you're waiting to buzz. You don't know how long you're gonna wait. I waited for about 10 minutes by myself in the cold with no shoes on. Once I actually got to the once the buzzer goes off, I can walk through the doors, and I'm in this huge blinding room where it's just orange light. I can't see anything. I have to walk towards the voices. It's sand, so I have no shoes on, so I'm walking in the sand, and I hear voices saying, "Come towards me." They give me a backpack. It's about 7 pounds to simulate the crossing the border with a backpack on me. They give me the VR equipment. It's a huge room, about as big as this, and they're just in the room, 2 people, to make sure I don't run into a wall. So I'm tethered in, and as soon as the VR experience starts, I'm instantly in the desert. I see immigrants walking up to me. Half of them look like they're getting ready to die because they're so tired. Little kids crying, and then out of nowhere, it's heavy floodlights come in, border patrol, huge machine guns come out, a lot of Spanish being yelled everywhere. Everybody's on the ground. It was the most traumatizing thing I could have ever experienced, and it went on for about 10 minutes. And I didn't know there. And then too, once the experience was over, you had a hall where you got to look at all the people who were in the actual VR simulation were real people. So you got to kind of read their stories. But once you were done, you were dumped out at the back of the museum by yourself. So you're back in the museum, like nothing ever happened. And I was so perplexed, and I almost wanted to forget it. I took my headphones off because I was like, this is too much. But I didn't know what the point was. I mean, I know what the point is, but I didn't know, was I supposed to be that disturbed? Is that what he wanted? Did he want me not to talk about it and have that nightmare experience, or did he want me to share my experience? So when I go through a lot of VR experiences, I don't always know what the intention is, and then too, I don't know if people know what they want the intention is when they make it. You know, so I'm always, depending on the experience, I see different things about the impact and what we want the impact to be. If you haven't seen that exhibition, I'm like slaughtering the name of it, but it's at LACMA, and you'll see it's a huge, like I just went to the last VR, and they're saying like you can't even get in, it's such a big deal. I didn't realize it was that like hard to get in, but I waited for about an hour to get into it, and like I said, you're by yourself, so it was one of the most terrifying experiences I hope to never ever do again.
Yeah, I don't know how to quite eloquently state this about metrics, because I think that, you know, sometimes we see our attendance spike around, you know, politically difficult times, and a lot of times we see visitors, and we hear visitors say that, you know, they want to just come and be in our space, and like that's enough. So they don't need, you know, to talk about politics, but to be in that environment where they belong, and to have that feeling like it's enough there. So, you know, I think that the mandate is a little bit different for culturally specific organizations. But yeah, we kind of see that sort of response in just general attendance.
Yeah, and our outcomes, you know, we want to create more engaged citizens. And again, just like if you tell everybody to vote, they're not all going to vote the way you want them to vote, right? So you have to like let go of there's only so much you can inspire people to do, and then you have to hope that, you know, that there are people who would argue that a less engaged citizenry can be a more successful democracy. We've had lots of conversations about this with our historians, but you know, so I think that's why we sort of fall back on those things that are a little easier to talk about, right? We want people to reflect. We want people to talk to each other, you know, and I think, you know, obviously we're still wondering if that's enough or not. So there's another hand.
I just was wondering, because I know that you guys feel, you're very articulate about being a little bit hamstrung by the institutional requirements of being neutral or not advocating, but I just wondered as panelists, if you have had a personal experience, just as a visitor someplace, where you felt like you were engaged, your empathy was so engaged that you actually felt at the end of the day like you knew what to do with that. Like, have you seen that be successfully leveraged to call you to action? I'm just curious if you've had personal experiences, besides, of course, eating a tortilla and devoting
Right, which is naturally what you do when you eat a tortilla, right? You then decide to devote your, yeah. That's that's a really good question. I wish we had thought about that.
That's a great question. I'll say for me, like I said, it can be traumatizing talking to so many genocide survivors every single day, multiple times a day. And what I did learn from it all is for me to really understand perspective, for me to be a more informed citizen. I hate that I talk to my friends right now about the Rohingya and Myanmar and Burma, and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So for things like that, it has really caused me to make sure I do all I can do to be informed and make better decisions and identify organizations, for example, that are helping good news outlets where I can actually learn who are reporting on what's happening in Myanmar and in different places like that. So that's what I took away from that experience.
I'll say one bit for me is at the Field Museum in Chicago. I'm as a prerequisite to my comment, I'm kind of an evolution nerd. I'm really obsessed with, and I studied that as my background. And in their Evolving Planet, the ambiance, the story they tell, and the drama that they employ in very low tech and semi-medium tech ways, by the time you've made this trek from the beginning of the world to where we are today, and then they kind of hit you with, boom, all of a sudden we're in this global warming crisis, it's really powerful and really moving, and it seems like a very easy way to, they're eliciting that empathy, and then they're begging a very simple question at the end of, what are you going to do? And then you empty out into the rest of the museum, and you see scientists, volunteers doing work in a big glassed window. So yeah, I hope that answers your
That's
question.
interesting, and that leads me to something that I was thinking about when we were talking about this presentation, is that I wonder, I think people are more likely to accept sort of specific direction from science museums because there is what I think is a false perception that science museums are more evidence-based than history museums. That we're just like, we're interpreting the past, but science, that's based on research. So therefore, if it's based on actual research, then you know what the steps are, and I mean, to a certain extent, that's true, right? Like, I can't tell you exactly what to do to fix sort of problems with our democracy right now. I mean, there are certain, so I mean, that's kind of true, but I do wonder if, next time we do this, we should have a science museum.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say one of the biggest things I've learned is that words matter. So a lot of the genocides that we've studied started with words. Even when we're doing Rwanda, we've killed the cockroaches, and it started all with words. So it really makes me mindful, not that I wasn't before, but it really puts things in perspective for me about, all lives mattering, as far as, we only think about the U.S., but we usually don't, my friends don't usually think about what's happening to other places in the world, people who look just like me. The most challenging thing I tell people is working with Rwandan victims or survivors, because they're my age, they look like me, and they're having children now, and they're having to tell their children why they don't have aunts, uncles, grandparents, and things like that. And we don't think about things like that. So it really makes you think about perspective, how fortunate you are, and give what are you doing with your life? Why aren't you doing more? Because you have endless opportunities, So it really, for me, I think I needed that experience too. I mean, it was a blessing to be able to work there and work with so many inspirational people.
I think we might be.
We're done. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.